the Medical AI Podcast.
Welcome to the Medical AI Podcast with me, Dr. Felix Beecher. Strap in for a 30-minute thrill ride of big ideas. Imagine you've just been diagnosed with a serious heart condition. You will need a carefully crafted care plan. This will help manage your medications, appointments, and lifestyle changes. But then imagine you're caught up in the gears of a dysfunctional health system with doctors not talking to each other, communications going missing, maybe you've even receiving the wrong treatment. These could mean the difference between life and death. But how common are these kind of issues with care plans? And how could AI potentially help? With me to discuss these very important issues is Dr. Aki Al-Zubaidi of Eon Health. Aki, a very, very warm welcome to the podcast.
Man, thank you so much, Felix, for having me.
Aki, could you please introduce yourself to the listeners and explain a little bit about what it is that Eon Health is all about?
Absolutely. I'm Dr. Aki. I'm an interventional pulmonologist, which is a lung doctor, and specifically interventions. And my professional career as a physician was really in diagnosing lung cancer. And out of that spawned a journey with Eon Health in which we identify not just lung cancers, but also other abnormalities that if they're not appropriately followed up upon, could be catastrophic.
Let's start off with what a care plan is. Could you define that for us and explain about why they are important at all?
Yeah, absolutely, Felix. So if you look at a care plan, there's an abnormality or something that needs a next step, whether it's a treatment, whether it's a diagnostic test. And so normally, physicians, providers, what they do is that they collect subjective information, objective information, and then they put down what could be the potential diagnoses, and then they make a plan. That plan part is the care plan, Felix. Specifically, the problem that Eon Health is solving for is, if you look at radiology scans that are done in the U.S. every year, 691 million. And people should understand this because if you go to an ED or your doctor, they're doing some sort of imaging just to try to understand what could be going on in a region that you may be having an issue. Of those scans that are done, the 691 million, 40% have abnormalities. And that's 1.224 million per year have abnormalities. The majority of those abnormalities aren't the specific thing that they were looking for on those scans. Those abnormalities need to have a care plan that's generated. Of that 1.2 million, 65% don't get the appropriate follow-up. So that's 796,000 of those 1.2 million abnormalities aren't getting the appropriate next steps. The next step is the care plan, Felix.
Okay, and that sounds like a very significant problem. Could you put that into context in terms of the US health system, for example? How big a problem is that really?
Yeah, that is the US numbers. Globally, it's even larger. So when I say 691 million and 796,000 of those, that's a big population that is getting not appropriate care for something that could be potentially catastrophic.
Okay, but let's stick with the example of lung cancer, since that's your special area. What are the consequences of these kind of slip-ups in care plans?
Yeah, so if you look at lung cancer, the 5-year rate of, if you're diagnosed, in terms of the survival rate, if you diagnose somebody at an early stage lung cancer, their survival rate's 91%. Versus a late stage, the 5-year survival rate is 10 to 15%.
Yeah.
And so a drastic change in curative versus palliative options. And if you look at the 5-year mortality, we're talking about giving somebody, a survival rate that's close to the general population versus almost a guaranteed death sentence.
And could you give examples from your personal experience as a physician where care plans have gone badly and where care plans have gone well?
Yeah, Felix, I'll tell you that the thing that really sparked me to get into even doing something like Eon, there's really two patients, Ben and Jack. And, I was working in a small community where I knew not just the patients, but their families. And Ben was a guy, he's 36 years old, who came in for a cough that never resolved, had an abnormal chest x-ray, and that chest x-ray, he got antibiotics and then left, right? And came back a year and a half later and ended up getting diagnosed with a stage 4 lung cancer instead of having an appropriate care plan where a year and a half prior probably should have had a follow-up CT scan at an interval that was much shorter than what he got. Jack was the same thing where he had a small nodule, and Jack actually went 3 years from his first nodule being detected incidentally after a car accident, and then 3 years later had this non-resolving cough and some other symptoms. A CT scan was done, and Jack went from a stage 1 to a stage 4. And so those two patients being connected to their family and them and the community got me to a point where I was like, never again, as a patient who has these signals in clinical data in which it's very simple to avoid catastrophic sequelae, is going to happen in the hospital that I work in. And I made a commitment to the hospital that I worked in and the community that I worked in, Felix.
All right, so that brings us very nicely onto Eon Health. Could you just describe the evolution of the company and a bit about what kind of systems you've developed?
Yeah, man, I'll tell you, it started off me getting pissed about those two patients and looking for a solution on the market. And there wasn't a solution on the market to identify the patients who had those abnormalities and then help manage them. And so, I was like, I got to figure this out. And it was all manual. It was like a manufacturing line at my office trying to maintain this commitment that I made. And so I started saying, hey, how can I solve this problem in my own clinic? And that's how this started. And we ended up actually in my own clinic having a system, a process, which was less technology, but mostly it was processes and people. And it worked, but it was like so consuming. Like every FTE, even myself, was working trying to do the things manually, like manufacturing, in order to maintain this commitment of patients who have pulmonary nodules and ensuring that they can get diagnosed at an earlier stage. And so we started to look at some of those things that the humans were doing and that we were doing and overlaying technology, and actually ended up becoming pretty efficient at it and getting good results. I'll tell you a story early on, Felix, is that I thought I had solved it, right? Because I solved it in my clinic. And every Saturday I'd wake up and I would email, I don't know why I did this, but I emailed all these daggone billionaires, like everybody you could think of that was a billionaire at the time. I was like, I have a solution for lung cancer, and I want this solution to be everywhere. And Mark Cuban one Saturday morning emailed me back. And I didn't even have like the proper emails. I just like did, email structure and, hey, maybe this person, this is the right email structure for that billionaire. He goes, wish I could help you. Can't you find a local developer that you trust? And I remember my wife telling me, I go, hey, email, Mark Cuban just emailed me. She goes, that's not Mark Cuban. That ain't him. And, but it motivated me. Like, okay, all right, you know what? Like, I don't need money. I don't need some sort of like crazy thing. I could just find a local developer and try to make this thing better on my own.
Yeah.
And so started working on it early in the early days, like literally like wake up at 4 a.m., work till 7 till I had to go to the hospital, worked at night, worked on the weekends on it, and just constantly made this thing better for my own clinic. And then once I made it better for my own clinic, I was like, I want this thing out there for everybody. And started doing what I would call is the zombie walk, where, you go out there and you think, hey, I need to go raise money to support scale. And I'll tell you that like, they're like, hey, listen, you're doing this out here at this small hospital. You need to do this at Mass General, Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, somewhere big, and then come back and talk to me. So our second client was the Cleveland Clinic. And, that was just a huge thing for us, because having this solution, not just in some small clinic from a pulmonologist who got pissed off about a couple patients, but actually having it at a big academic institution that's as big as the Cleveland Clinic, and it actually working, was like the beginning of a snowball for the company, if that makes sense, Felix.
Okay, well, could you maybe walk us through how the product works, what it looks like from the perspective of the patient, perhaps?
Yeah, from the patient, it's they don't see much. They go to the hospital. Let's say you get into a car accident and you may have hurt your ribs, and they do a CT scan or X-ray or some imaging of your ribs, and there's a pulmonary nodule. Let's say that maybe you hurt your shoulder, and an orthopedic surgeon orders an MRI of your shoulder but captures some of your lung, and there's an abnormality there. It's probably in your report. Maybe you're not thinking about it. Maybe you have other issues, and you may or may not remember that, hey, there's this abnormality that may need follow-up in some time in the future, like 6 or 12 months. So on discharge, they end up leaving and you don't know. But then what our company is doing is that, right as they leave, we're sending your doctor a message that this abnormality exists. And we're making sure that your doctor has awareness of it. And then we also send the patient communication either through their EHR messages and also through the mail that, hey, you went to the hospital looking for something else, but we may have found something that needs follow-up. And then what we do is we go into this active listening phase where we're listening to whether or not your physician has actually put in the orders that we expect to happen. And, let's say that you have a 6-month follow-up. 2 months prior to 6 months, if we don't see that order, we're communicating with your physician. And we're really making sure that, hey, the physician has awareness and they have the ability to put in the order, and they're putting in the right order for you as the patient. So the patient's going to feel, okay, hey, I got this order, and I've been communicated that I got something different that they weren't even looking for that needs follow-up. And then once the physician puts the order in, we're communicating with the patient and advocating with the patient for the resources that they need to get that diagnostic study done or that treatment completed.
So it's not that the system is creating a care plan, it's more that it's making sure that the lines of information are connected and that the care plan is created seamlessly by the physician. Is that fair?
That's interesting you say that, because we are creating an expected care plan, but the physician is the person who is, the provider is actually creating the care plan itself. Right.
Gotcha. But you're also keeping the physician honest and making sure that he sticks to what he ought to be doing.
Expected care plans are different than care plans, because care plans is practicing medicine. Right. And so, but the effectiveness of us predicting what the care plan is going to be and what the physician should order or is going to order is as close to 100% as you can get.
Okay, so could you give us an idea of, in the case of lung cancer, what does a care plan look like? What are the key components of it? How long does it last? All those kind of basic things.
Yeah, so not to get into too many details about lung cancer, but there's different types. And some of them get you, some of them don't, right? And so it's not like a polyp. I'm going to give you an example from, most people get colonoscopies to screen for colon cancer. And you go in there and you look at it and there's a polyp. And you know what they do? They remove the polyps. Some are cancer, some are not. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't really hurt you if you have the polyps removed. There's not really a big risk of removing polyps. The difference with lung nodules is that the majority of them aren't cancer. But I can't go in there with a scope and just remove all of the nodules, because there's risk to removing those nodules. And the majority of them are not cancer. So what you have to do is that you have to have a care plan that's really based on risk, in terms of, who do I do nothing? Who do I do another test to see if it's growing, because cancer grows, right? And it grows at a certain rate. And then if it's highly likely to be cancer, I don't want to wait and see if it grows. I want to go get a test to say whether it's cancer or not definitively. And if it is cancer, then I want to have a treatment, which hopefully is surgical resection. If it's not surgical resection, there's radiation therapy. And obviously, if it is cancer and it's a later stage, there's different types of chemotherapy and other treatments as well. All portions of care plans for lung cancer and pulmonary nodules.
Got it. Okay, so you were trying to attract venture capital funding, and as a requirement for that, you did some research with these illustrious institutions like the Mayo Clinic and whoever else. Could you just talk us through that research process and what the results were?
Yeah, so the Cleveland Clinic was our second client, and it wasn't research. It was they bought our product commercially. Research came after they were a client for the commercial product. They had tried to solve this problem with their EHR and with two other vendors prior and had failed. And there's multiple fail points in the solutions. And so we were able to go in there with this solution and actually solve the problem and get a result at scale at the Cleveland Clinic. Then, because the platform had so much rich data about pulmonary nodules and also lung cancer, that we ended up doing research around predictive models and also risk stratification or risk scores and image analysis with the Cleveland Clinic.
I see. Now, we've talked a lot about lung cancer because you are a pulmonologist by background, but it's not just lung cancer that your system deals with, right? It has other clinical areas too. Could you just explain those?
Yeah, there's so many different types of incidental findings and things of abnormalities that need to be followed up that are outside of lung cancer. Aortic aneurysms, right? If your aorta is growing to a certain size, it's at risk of rupture. If you have a pancreatic cyst or a pancreatic cancer, thyroid, liver, in women's health, like breast, people do mammograms, but there's also incidental breast findings that happen in things outside of mammograms. All of these things are targets that make sense for us to extend past lung, and we have. And we want to extend even past that, where labs are looked at, pap smears for cervical cancer, other abnormalities that are outside in pathology reports or other labs, and even sensor data. If you're wearing a sensor and you have a irregular heart rhythm, Felix, that may need follow-up. Who's capturing that trigger and then making sure that a care plan is generated and that it's adhered to? Like, that's what we're looking for. It's not just lung, it's everything.
Okay, got it. So now I'm sure, Aki, that you sometimes visit hospitals and you're talking about your product, and they will ask you typically something like, okay, what's the actual evidence this is going to make difference to our hospital or our patients? How do you answer that kind of question?
So multiple ways. I think that we've matured to early on. It was different. It was theory, right? Today it's proven, and some of the easiest ways is validated case studies at scale across. We have 70 health systems and 1,000 hospitals with a maturity level. The company's past 10 years old, and so we have a lot of data in terms of outcomes. And if you look at LifePoint Health and UC Health, I'll go with LifePoint Health first. They have approximately over 60 hospitals and 60,000 care plans that are generated per year. 175,000 downstream exams and procedures have been completed above which would have been completed. So that's the patients that would have been missed. 175,000 downstream exams and procedures would have been missed and not done in those patients. UC Health had 25 times more care plans generated. They had an increase over tenfold in terms of the number of patients that were actually following up that were lost to follow up in previous years. And they had a previous system and had good data before and after.
Yeah. Now, you said that when you started Eon Health, there was no solution available to this problem. What about now? Have things changed very much? How competitive is this space now?
Yeah, there's definitely competitors, and it's there was, if you look even at lung cancer screening solutions that were software based. When we were there with the ACR as the first vendor to submit to the registry, there was only one of us, and now there's probably 30. There also wasn't any competitive EHR modules 10 years ago. And now there is. The problem is that they're focused on one part of the solution, or it's a different solution that's been capitalized in which that solution isn't having an ROI, so they're trying to extend into our market. And that's definitely happened over the past 3 to 5 years. It's increased dramatically, Felix.
Now, the system sounds, it sounds on the one hand necessary, and it sounds also important, and it's hard to think of a downside to these kind of systems, but is there one that maybe I haven't thought about?
Yeah, I mean, listen, when you have abnormalities in which the majority of them are not the catastrophic problem, you could end up putting people through diagnostic procedures that they don't need. And so, what we're also looking at in the future is, hey, which ones of these do we need to be a little more conservative versus aggressive in terms of the diagnostic next steps? And that's something that really excites me, because you don't want to do things to people that don't need it. I don't want to do a surgery on somebody if they don't have cancer. And Felix, that happens today, right? Where we put patients to go to surgery to either diagnose or remove their lung cancer, and it ends up being benign.
Well, I guess that happens in all areas of medicine, and whether we're talking about AI systems or human systems, right? So it's not like it's a new problem. How does your system relate to that specifically?
In terms of the back end data of outcomes and de-siloing that data. So if you look at all of the patients that have been through the system, you have this initial trigger with the characteristics of that pulmonary nodule and also the characteristics of the patient and a risk profile. You have what the interventions are in terms of that patient, in terms of what was done, and you have the outcome. And so what excites me is tying those variables upstream in terms of, hey, here's the characteristics, here's the patient profile, here's the outcomes. Maybe in this specific circumstance, even though they may have the same size nodule or a few of the characteristics, because of this other variable, this patient should have something different in a care plan than the other patient. And we're more right than not in terms of putting patients through either more aggressive or conservative management.
I see. So now, what are the key limitations of your system? What are the things that you would like to improve or are improving?
So I'll tell you, this is something that I'm the most excited about, and I love it, Felix. So listen, this is we've gotten better.
I'm excited even before you told me.
Yeah, I know. I'm telling you, this is it, right? So I talk about that manufacturing line, right? And if you look at what AI does, right, it can streamline workflows, right, and intensive portions of the workflow. So if I want to be able to create a care plan for these patients, I got to be able to identify them. I got to be able to get all the data out. All of that's normally manual, right? And so we've overlaid AI to be able to take away portions of some of that time and labor intensive portions of the workflow. So, and we can get into this too, like linguistics, whether it's image analysis, whether it's predictive modeling of the next step. The problem with that is that you have efficiencies that are gained, and we've got that, and that's what gave us a big advantage. But now what's happening is that every single one of those outputs then needs to be validated or amendment. And so the people who are doing the validation or the amendments, we don't know ahead of time which actions or which outputs from AI require amendment. And so humans now are programmed in their DNA that if I have to validate one thing, but the other stuff has been, validated or has high fidelity, they're going to auto-validate everything. They're going to annotate everything, right? And it doesn't save any time or money. And so what you have to do is have the ability to have AI validate AI through something called confidence scores. And what that means is that, hey, listen, when AI has this specific output, 100% of the time, the human never changes it. They don't amend it, right? And for those, I don't want those outputs from our AI or any AI in clinical use to be, even shown to the human. Just go to the expected next step. Go to the output, right? And so what we're working on, and what I think is really exciting, is that there's going to be ability to take away the manufacturing of AI or the manufacturing work of AI validation and AI amendment. Think about ChatGPT. I put in a query, I get this result. And if you were to copy paste that thing, right? It's going to be horrible. What most people do is they validate whether the outputs from an LLM are valid, right? Or they amend it, and it makes it better. Mm-hmm. I want to take away the need for the majority of actions to have that validation from the human or the amendment that's needed by a human. And that's really going to make this thing hyper scalable, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I think in general, it seems to me that most medical AI systems don't really give an indication of the confidence of their outputs, and LLMs is a good example of that. ChatGPT will never say to you, "Well, I'm not really sure, but here's what I think," right? And it's a bit like that with medical AI systems too.
That's right. And if you look at the transactional cost in healthcare, it's much more than like an LLM for marketing or other types of administrative work, because it requires a subject matter expert to do the validation or the amendment, right? And so, like, if you have somebody whose cost is 10x from a normal validation, I mean, it's astronomical if you look at the number of outputs that come from AI that need a subject matter expert to validate them.
Got it. Okay, so what kind of challenges do you face in terms of scaling and deploying?
Yeah, it's there's a couple. I think that you have environments that are highly variable that you're implementing your solution into, and it's not just legacy technology, software. It's the people, the resources, their depth of knowledge. The environment's extremely variable, and they may have made investments into other portions of technology that are part of the solution. And so everywhere you go, you may have to, it's not like a standard cookie cutter way to get the result of a solution. You may need portions of your solution implemented. You may need, there may be gaps in certain things that are required for the solution that need to be filled. And then there's also governance and mission criticality in terms of how this is perceived. And so all of those things, delay either implementation or the ability to implement well and scale.
And how would you describe the general level of acceptance in principle versus skepticism? How do those kind of conversations go?
I mean, healthcare is skeptical at its core, and that's what doctors, as a physician, you're trained to be skeptical, right? And then I think that they've been burned, right? Like hospital systems have been burned. What's the payoff when it comes to AI, both clinical, operational, and financial? And a lot of times, there hasn't been a payoff, right? And so I'll tell you that 10 years ago, the amount of skepticism about the problem existed. Now there's extreme acceptance that this is a big problem, it's mission critical, and they want to solve for it.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to AI or automation versus other solutions that are more manual or in the primary workflow, I think there's still a lot of skepticism.
Well, Aki, we have covered such a lot of ground in a short space of time, very efficiently and clearly, I think. So thank you for that. It was a very interesting overview. However, before I let you go, I always ask my guests what your favourite example of medical AI is that's got nothing to do with your own.
Yeah, I tell you, I like sensors, Felix, and there's a lot of AI that's being deployed in some sensors. And if you look at sleep studies, I'm a pulmonologist, and part of pulmonology, Felix, is sleep and sleep medicine. And it used to be that you had to wear all of these daggone sensors and like a EEG monitor, and you had to go to the actual site and sleep there. And now there's technology that's being developed where it's a sensor that really hangs on your wall, and it's tracking how your chest rises. It's looking, it's able to sense all types of different movements that required 10x the amount of sensors prior, and then it's creating a profile for you utilizing artificial intelligence and capturing other data as well during that time. And to me, like, the sensor AI and just sensors in general are an exciting space, and I hope to be part of that too with our company in terms of ingesting that data.
It's very interesting. Aki, it's been an absolute pleasure talking about all of this stuff. Very best of luck with the On Health, and thank you for coming on.
I appreciate you, Felix. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening. Ping me on LinkedIn if you have any ideas on new subjects or guests.